In this Pfoton conversation, we talk with Roo Lewis, a London-based commercial photographer working with some of the UK's most respected brands and publications. His love for and association with Wales through his Pembrokeshire-born grandfather has strengthened in recent years and was realised in photobook form in late 2023 in his highly personal Port Talbot UFO Investigation Club, published by GOST Books.
I went down a big UFO hole doing the project. I do love research-based monographs. That's what I like, and I get obsessed. I always talk about this writer, John Ronson, who's my favourite. He wrote this book called Them. I've loved that since I first read it at university. And he always talks about becoming an expert in a field when you write about it and then forgetting it all. I'm not sure I've forgotten it all, but I probably forgot most of it. But I was worried. There was 3 different facets to this book, right? There's the UFO community, and I really didn't want to offend them. It's very sort of enthusiastic community. There's the town and the Welsh in general. I wanted to represent those people well. You know, none of the images. If you laugh at an image, we're not sort of taking the mick out of anyone. We're sort of, you know, some of the images are humorous, but we're not laughing at them. And the third was the photobook community. You know, there's this Photoland thing, and the publisher was really cool. It was a publisher called GOST, and you know, we went through all that sequencing and, you know, the size and how that plays into the project as a whole. And, you know, I was very pleased with the response from everyone, really. You know, I touched on the UFO stuff. It was this club I created, essentially, and used as a vehicle to explore. And I met people who'd seen and interacted with UFOs, and none of it was about truth. You know, that people always say, well, do you believe them? Well, why does that matter? Yeah, if you want, I believe you. It's not about truth. It's about storytelling and this idea and what that story means to that person and how they've come to that conclusion and why. And with lots of these stories, you can look up the truth. With others, you can't. And UFOs, you can't. It's just an interesting exploration, I think, into that sort of human psyche and condition. And
so will Port Talbot see your work?
Yeah, I mean, I've made really good friends in Port Talbot. I'm doing an exhibition, and I'm going to take it to the town, and I'm just trying to find out the best way to do it. Again, I'm a bit of a stickler for things have to look perfect, basically. so they it ends up being quite expensive. I'm just trying to work out the best way to do it. But yeah, this exhibition, I'm going to show the photos in London, right, however that manifests, and then take that to a town. And it's not to sell books or prints. It'd be going to a local place I've been talking to, hanging some photos, and then buying everyone a beer and inviting everyone that was in it to come down and see them. But I've been back quite a few times actually since shooting it. And seen people and yeah, I've made some wonderful friends there actually, and it sort of really made me think about the job cuts. You know, when that's quite real when you know those affected and how they feel. But I think they're used to it. You know, when you talk to it, they were told differently, but I don't think they were expecting a different outcome. Let's put it that way.
I've been to Port Talbot a couple of times. I used to live not far from there, and I would go to Port Talbot to shoot and found it really difficult. But what struck me about your work there is the warmth that comes through, and there's a specific sort of glow to it, which I found really not inspiring is the wrong word. I found it very attractive. And I found your subject matter very attractive because of the warmth of the light. And were you going there at specific times to shoot?
Oh, yeah. So I would... so first of all, South Wales has the most beautiful light. It really does. You have long, lovely golden hours, which go on for about 3 hours. And so I would plan when I'm shooting around those times. You have to get very early in summer, in July, and Port Talbot, it is the light gets too bright at about 8 a.m. So you have to get up super early. But then you get those lovely long evenings. So yeah, I did sort of plan around that. But I was also sort of blessed. A lot of the time I'll go there and, a rainbow would come out, or you get this wonderful, part of the character building in South Wales is the weather, right? You might get a storm and then this beautiful sunlight afterwards.
Yeah.
And the storm's beautiful if you've sort of planned out where to look. I do think it's too easy to shoot it in a bad light, so to speak, both literally and metaphorically speaking. High contrast black and white stuff's cool, but I've seen it a lot, seen that industrial stuff a lot. So the area is it's area of outstanding natural beauty, right? All that area around there. So I did want to shoot it in a light which was a bit more true to the area, let's say. But yeah, it meant you could only be in one place at one time, right? So if you were taking a portrait at 8 p.m, that's your lot for the day, really. You can't sort of rush around to get anything else. What was your experience, EMYR? So you used to live nearby?
Yeah, I did. I lived in Llantrisant, which is on the edges of the industrial area up to the Rhondda Valley, etc. So that became my playground, if you like. So I would go a lot to, and I got the tail end of. I was there during the miners' strike, so lots was happening. And I was shooting on film then, and going up to Mardi and these places was an eye-opener for me, being a boy from sort of Llandilo area, the Ammanford area, the Carmarthenshire area of Wales. So it was a big eye-opener for me, and I learnt a lot. But I used to go to Port Talbot and found it really hard because people is my thing, really. I enjoy people and talking to people, and doing sort of portraits of people. That's my thing, really. And I found found it very austere and a bit depressing for me. And so that's why when seeing your photographs lightened my heart and made me feel that area has something special to offer. And obviously you've tapped into that something special. And that was good to see, really. I often ask myself, what is the reality that I see in photographs? Am I seeing, do you know what I mean? Because we, as photographers, like you go in golden hour to Port Talbot and you see it in a particular light. So what is the reality of Port Talbot?
It's a good question. I always struggle with that in photography because I don't think we can ever be truly objective, right? There's always a subjective. We're always building a narrative. If it's why did you choose to photograph that angle, that person, that view, that time of day, that focal length, that film stock? I don't think you can ever be truly objective. So, I see photography as trying to say something. It doesn't have to be like a political point necessarily. But I do like this idea of creating a universe and photographing within that. And, photo books or a true monograph would be like a singular study of that subject and how you respond as a photographer, and that's through the visual style, what you're choosing, your subjects, the narrative you're weaving. I mean, certainly when I started, I did think photography, you're just taking photos of what's there. And I don't understand it to be that at all now. I think you need to create a universe and show off that universe, let other people into it. And I remember when I first saw Alex Soth's work, Sleeping by the Mississippi, that was my first photo book, which everyone's got, I think. But I went to see it at the Science Museum. They had this massive exhibition of it, and it's really hard to explain when you sort of stand in front of these prints. The only way I can explain it's like this whoosh that's going on. Like you're looking into this print, you're in this world, you don't understand it, but it's wonderful. And in that respect, I don't think reality matters. You can go there and see the reality of it or see your view of it. I think what matters is what do those photos make you feel? That's what I see photography as. It's making me feel something, and the town made me feel something, and the project as a whole, this idea of UFOs and clubs and hope, it made me feel something, and it Wales in general makes me feel something. It's the town to me is like a dreamland, and it invokes emotions, and it's not always happy emotions. Port Talbot isn't this utopia where everyone's hand in hand dancing around, nor should it be. But it does breed this wonderful character, and there's this wonderful character in South Wales, which I really dig. It's this. I mean, there's this gentleman called Owen who emailed me, and I sort of dined out on what he said to me. He sent me this wonderful email. He used to be at Magnum, and it's nice that. And he just sent, thank you for this quote, by the way, Owen. And he said, Wales breeds this tenacity. There's a tenacity and a warmth to the characters you meet. And I was like, yeah, that's great. I'm going to use that. Thank you.
Yes.
And it's not happy memories. It's not. I always think about dreaming and what's the most meaningful dream you have, and it tends to me, for me, not happy memories. And Wales embraces the beauty and the sadness sometimes, the beauty and the beautiful. And I found that in the town. So I'm not trying to capture reality, nor do I think I should. I'm trying to, when someone else looks at a success for me is if someone else looks at those photos and feels something. Yeah. And that I think that's what makes us human. There's the study of this human condition.
Where did you find your narrative as a photographer?
Where did I find my narrative? When the project started, it definitely evolved as the project started.
Okay.
And I like things to be all-encompassing.
Yeah.
So I did read about, I think I listened to it on a podcast, actually, Richard Herring's podcast about Michael Sheen talking about UFOs.
Yes.
It was a portal.
Yeah.
I think he said it was an intergalactic little chef. And he's doing it tongue-in-cheek. But there are a high number of sightings. I thought, that's interesting. And I like that topic. I've always sort of liked that topic. I did philosophy at university. I didn't do photography, I did philosophy. And I like talking about concepts. You can talk for hours about stuff that is meaningless or meaningful or whatever. But I like the exercise of doing it. And I think UFOs is a good example of that. We can, when we talk about it, as I always say, people might go to black projects, US military planes. People might say it's just lights or flares or people messing around. People might deny its existence, or some people even go to God. It could be God. But what we all do is we tend to talk about what we think rather than what it is. And UFOs is quite innocuous. It doesn't really hurt anyone. It's just like an exercise, metaphysical exercise, right, of what we think about the universe. So I quite like it. That immediately caught me. And then the town, I knew the town. My grandfather was Welsh.
Oh, right.
And we used to drive past the town to visit him. He used to tell us it's a space station, and it does. There's an allure to the steelworks, which is changing. But blast furnace 4 and 5, like I said in the book, my brother and I would have our nose pressed against the window, looking at this wonderful, whether it was lit up because we were driving late or early in the morning, or in midday, with the steam and smoke and sound of industry going on. You whiz past on the motorway. So I knew the town from that, but I also stayed there. I was shooting a story locally, and I think that's the only place I could stay was on the beach in Port Talbot for not much money. And you realise this place is wild, during the night when the steelworks is operating, the sky lights on fire, and it's this crazy place. So I was like, wow, I've got to do something here. So I just went in to explore it. And then you'll naturally, the more you sort of talk about things to people, it sort of develops. So I didn't have the story or narrative mapped out from the start. It definitely evolved, but it was all presupposed around this idea of UFOs being hopeful, lights in the sky, and this industrial town. You know, it must be hard coming from an industrial town. It was called the most polluted town in the UK, which I don't think was true. I think it was labelled as that. It's, as you say, it's not. I suppose I don't find it depressing, but lots of people do. It's an industrial town. It's a small industrial town. It's perhaps not nice on a not nice day. So it is hard to come from there. So the idea of someone looking up in the sky and seeing lights, you know, that Oscar Wilde, we're all in the gutter, but some of us are looking at the stars, and those lights being hope. And when you meet people there, and there's this wonderful, tenacious, warm character.
Absolutely.
It's a character study of a town and the characters in it. You know, I'm being told to stop using the word love letter, but it is a love letter to the town. And I found it very. I found the whole experience quite emotional, actually, and I'm trying to sort of convey that in the book. What it is to be human. It's all in there, I think.
Yeah, I mean, traveling through, it reminds me, it could be a shot from Blade Runner, actually, coming across the motorway on the M4. And actually, my great-grandfather is buried below the M4 somewhere, because my family moved from West Wales, from Pembrokeshire in West Wales, to Port Talbot when the place was being built. And they were carpenters, so windows and doors and all the things needed for, So it kind of has. I've never found his grave. It's in a church below the M4, and
I think I know exactly where it is.
And Dick Penderyn, of course, was buried there.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So, what was your family connection? You said your grandfather was. Did he work in the steelworks?
So he was Pembrokeshire as well.
Right.
So he was Milford Haven.
Oh, right.
And Haverfordwest for a while, and he was a draftsman, and he worked with is it Austin Healey, someone like that, as a engineer,
right? Or can't,
and then became a draftsman. And it wasn't until later he always say he was in the oil business,
right.
And I grew up thinking, oh wow. But when he was talking about oils, he was talking about lubricants. So he would mix oils in a shed somewhere in Milford Haven, and then later on Birmingham. But and he would deliver these for lathes, and one of the lathes that we think was Port Talbot.
Right.
That's an integrated steelworks, which has the start to finish steel, but not for long, but start to finish of steel production. And one is these huge lathes, and so he was always, after being in the army, that was his business, and so we used to visit him. We used to go to a place called Dale. I don't know if you know Dale.
Yes, I do know Dale. Yes. Well, I live in Haverfordwest, so it's literally.
Oh, you live in Haverfordwest?
It's literally down the road from where I live. Yeah.
Yeah. So the refinery there, right, is. What do you feel about that?
Well, I photographed it quite a lot, and there are if you photograph it from the freshwater west end of the refinery, and you photograph it at night, it's like a jeweled crown. It is an astonishing place. And I've also photographed it from a more sort of a brutalist sort of angles, very contrasty black and white stuff. But did two versions of it. One when it looked very dark and all the pipes and everything coming up were all very dark. And then I photographed it in light where everything kind of glistened, it was just, it's an astonishing place. A friend of mine was actually arrested there because he's a wildlife photographer, and he went to places he shouldn't have gone to and was arrested, but with men with guns. But it's a strange place. Ooh. It's a kind of And it's weird, especially with the tankers coming in now, offloading natural gas and stuff. It's a strange old place, a strange old town, really, Milford. Yeah. But it has a theatre, which is good, you know.
Yeah, well, I so it's so you said you sort of love that refinery, but I mean, I do too, by the way. And when you look at the landscape, it is beautiful. It's a beautiful harbour, and I think when you're used to it, you don't notice it. But quite often, when people, the first thing they come is go, "Oh, there's a bloody refinery right there."
Yeah.
And of course, we don't see it. And so do you think it's better looking or worse looking than the steelworks?
That's a good question. I mean, photographing the steelworks, especially in that dusk time when you see all the fire and stuff, and being up close, that's an exciting place. And I've photographed in a bronze foundry near there as well, in where they were making, guys who'd been working in the steelworks had sort of gone into doing artworks, and they were pouring bronze and stuff. And as you say,
well, I think there's a history of bronze there, right?
Yeah.
I think the monks,
that's
the monks
right.
used to. Margam used to do that.
Have you seen Sheen's thing on the telly?
The Way.
Have you seen it?
Do you know what I have? I haven't actually, and I know I should.
Yeah.
And I remember them filming it down there. I think they started filming after I finished the project. But I love Michael Sheen. I really do. And everyone in the town loves him. And they should. And he's the biggest flag bearer for Talbot and Wales. Yes. And I think when he talks so wonderfully about it, that really, I don't know if you remember The Passion.
Yes.
Of course you do, but I don't know if you were at it. I wasn't, but there's a wonderful BBC documentary on it. And I just thought it was so wild to do the Passion play involving the whole town over 24 hours, and how much that meant to everyone.
Yes.
So I did watch that, and sort of when you're in Port Talbot, you sort of understand that's probably quite normal there, because it is this wild place.
Yes.
And everyone just walks around like it's normal, but it's, like I always say, it's this crazy place. And you'll meet someone who's had an interaction with Sheen, or he's done something nice or donated something you can't read about in the press, and he does so much for the town. I was in contact with him for a while to via his team to do something for the book, but we couldn't make it work. So I have sent him one. I don't know if he's got it yet, but I know he's seen it. I know he's seen it on the BBC or something. So I hope he likes it. I photographed his father, Merritt, who was lovely.
Yeah, he's a cool guy. I met him at the Larne Literary Festival, which I've been associated with as a photographer for too long now, really, I suppose. But genuine, very open human being, really, and tons of empathy. And I think, I think what being involved and living in an industrial area like Llantrisant and the coal mines, the loss of the coal mines has made a vast difference to the camaraderie within the town. I mean, it's now locked into rugby clubs, I guess. Still, it happens. What do you think? Have you thought about what will happen if and when? Which is the sad part, really. The steelworks comes to an end, and lots of people lose their jobs. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I've got a lot of thoughts on it. I'm not sure how relevant they are. I'm not Welsh and I'm not from the town, but I do have quite strong feelings on it. I do think they've been done over again. I do think it's unfair, and I do think there's a bit of this. I think Port Talbot's not the most profitable, and that, from what I understand, that might be because of tariffs imposed by certain governments. And so naturally, the company want to be more profitable. But certainly the narrative tends to be about the environment. So when we're talking about, which is very important, of course, but when we're talking about industry, I'm not sure. We're changing. So if anyone doesn't know, Port Talbot is changing from the blast furnace to arc furnaces, which are electric, and that's quite a big deal because when you talk about it in the news, it's like, oh, it's using electric, it's much more environmentally friendly, win-win. But actually, they're not making steel there, as I understand anymore. It's not from the raw material; it's essentially recycling, and it needs way fewer personnel to run that plant. So it's very different what we're talking about. It's not making steel anymore; it's sort of recycling steel. And the community is, like I say, the town is set up around the steelworks. It's furniture pointing towards a television set, and they're very proud, and they should be. Steel has been that town for such a long time. It's been a major employer, but it's this generational beacon. It's you meet someone and they work in the steelworks. Their dad worked in the steelworks. Their grandfather worked in the steelworks. You can look at that, whatever you think of it, that mill, that plant, and understand a very human story in that landscape. We touched on the Bronze Age stuff and monks, and that might be too much for me. I don't understand fossils and dinosaurs, all that stuff. What I do understand is a human story, and when you look at that steelworks and everything set up around it, chapels, lidos, cinemas, that's humans. We're here, we're here, we're strong. And it's been really hard work working in that, to make ends meet. They're not all driving around in Ferraris. They're working people, and they've got lives, and it's a community. It's a wonderful community. So I think it's a little bit short-sighted, if I may say, from the company, and I feel like they're sort of putting that under the blanket of environmentalism. And I'm not sure how much they care about environmentalism if you're in that sort of industry, would be my point. But they were told all sorts of things which haven't turned out to be true. And it's also important to remember, 3,000, I think, are being cut, or 2,800 full-time employees from Tata Steel. The knock-on, they think, is 3-1 in the contracting. So for every one full-time employee, there's 3 people down the line that might be working at the gasworks or the power plant or transport or any sort of support and ancillary services that will also lose their job as a result. So I don't know what that does to a town, but I do know they've dealt with a lot. When they built the motorway, I always talk about this. It's crazy. The M4 came straight through the town, and they destroyed half the town. The churches, schools, houses were forced buyout. No compensation. And what does that do to your head? When everyone that used to drive through and stop at your casino, I think it was the first legal casino in Port Talbot. There's a Lido, entertainment areas on the beach, Miami Beach it was called, music venues that were visited by big bands.
Yeah, well, it was. I think it was. The band. Who did I see? Oh God.
The Cocky Twins, I think, played
Pink
there.
Floyd.
Portishead.
Pink Floyd.
Pink Floyd. Yeah, that's big. I mean, Bonnie Tyler used to hang out there, I think, as well, in the clubs and things.
So, I mean, you said you studied philosophy at uni. So, where did the love of photography begin for you, Roo?
Well, it was my granddad that gave me a camera. But I was thinking about this, actually, because I've been asked this a lot. I'm definitely a visual person. I think I love stories. All the book is just stories and folklore and trying to tell those stories visually. I think that's how we learn as humans. That's how we connect through images, and folklore is this wonderful storytelling device, to pass down your values. You encapsulate your values of your generation in these wonderful tales. When you tell people, so they learn and remember them and pass them down. So I love stories, but I'm not a writer and I can't draw. So I think it comes for that. I like the study. I like how light falls. I like how things get rendered and look different in photography. It's when you take a photo, it looks totally different to how it looks, and you've got control of that. And I also like that as a device. I love people like you, and I like meeting people and talking to them, and it's quite a good device. I mean, the photo is probably the last thing I do when I meet someone. I'm talking about them, who they are, and what they do, and learning. Just listening.
It's really funny because photography for me was a kind of a device for being alone. But it was more,
You wanted to be alone?
it kind of. It's a weird one. I enjoy because it's something that you do alone. Photography is something you do alone. You wander, and wandering is kind of in my DNA. I think I like to wander and go down streets that I shouldn't go down, and meet people I maybe shouldn't meet, perhaps. But on the other hand, I enjoy the process of talking to people because, especially before taking their photograph, and gaining that little bit of trust that you need when you're photographing people, I think. And sometimes I believe that the actual conversation I have prior to taking somebody's photograph is more important than the actual photograph. And I don't know, do you feel the same way?
Oh, well, I think we're the same. I think we're the same in that. Yeah, I mean, there's the explorative nature of it, right? Where it leads you. And it's almost like you're on a mission.
Yes.
And yeah, when we talk about gaining trust, I'm sure you're the same, but I'm not tricking anyone. I am just talking to them and I want to learn.
Yeah.
And if you ask people, they want to tell you, So I suppose it's in the UK, it's a bit different in Wales, but in the UK, certainly in London, you don't really just go up to someone and talk to them. But if you go up to someone, and I always tell them exactly what I'm doing, and who I am. And Google helps. It's sort of, they can Google you and realise you're not a total weirdo, I suppose. So it's a good, it's a good device for talking to people, and so whenever I'm taking a photograph of anyone, say so Port Talbot, or to use another example, I might be taking a photo of an actor, something like that, and you have all these ideas and all these references of what you could do, of these great photographers, anyone on Magnum, Jamie Hawksworth, something like that. And then you meet someone and you talk to them for 5 seconds and you realise that's not going to work, because it might work visually, but it doesn't. When I talk to them, I just can't photograph them like that, because it doesn't. They might say they did ballet as a kid. It's like, oh my God, do some ballet, or do something. I don't know what it is, but you never know. And that, I think the spontaneity of photography is great. You never know exactly what you're going to do. And there's certainly lots of photographers that say the complete opposite. Tim Walker's famous for planning his beautiful dreamlike sequences are very sort of planned out, and that's his. But I like the idea of that collaboration when you meet someone, learning about them and shooting something within that vein.
Yes.
And then when they see the photo, they think, yeah, that's me.
Yeah.
That's the success. And my sort of fragile ego, I never betray someone's trust by taking a bad photo of someone. I don't think so. I don't think I'd do that.
Yeah.
But it might not come out like I want. But I want people to look good.
Yeah. And how do they react when they've seen your portraits of them, generally speaking?
I've never had a bad. I don't think I've ever had a bad reaction. You take. I do. I don't overshoot, but I certainly shoot more than I Probably should. That is overshooting, isn't it? But there's always you always sort of warm up. And interestingly, when I find people most relaxed is when I always say something like, I'm just going to test the light.
Yeah.
Which doesn't really make sense, shooting on a big 6.7 camera. But you get them at their most, when shooting normal people, I think we all think we know how we look good on camera. We might have seen an image where we look good at a party or something and in a pub, and we sort of try and recreate that. And of course that's what you think you look like. And when I'm looking at someone's face, I might be looking at how their eyes line up and what their symmetry of the side and what works. And as they talk, what they naturally do, their characteristics.
Yes.
And then you sort of mirror that, really, sort of follow it. But yeah, I never had someone hate. Well, they've never told me if they do. And of course, if they love it, you generally don't really hear. You might see them again and they say how much they love it.
Yeah.
But you don't really hear.
No, I just, it was really strange. I've been doing portraits of poets that have won crowns and chairs at the Eisteddfod, and there are 54 of them altogether for a book. And I only had one negative response, and it was strange. It was from a poet, and she's in her late 30s, and she was nervous about having a photograph done anyway. But we did a lot of talking and a lot of drinking coffee and eating cakes and stuff like that. And she had a really good relationship with her very large dog. So we had the large dog as part of the photograph, and it worked perfectly because she was at ease with her dog. But funnily enough, she didn't like the photograph of herself. And she's a bit sort of Sylvia Plath looking. There was that sort of air of something else about her. Although her friends told her the photograph was very nice and very good.
Well, that's it. That's often
it, isn't it?
What you need to sort of,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not sure your process. I tend not to show previews until it's finished.
Okay.
And partly the reason is it looks so. I work on negative, so you get the batch scans in, and it looks horribly washed out and awful.
Yeah.
It's not going to look anything like that. Yeah. And you can say to them, it's not going to look anything like this, but look at this. And that then becomes the benchmark or the truth for that photograph. So even when you finish it and it looks beautiful, they've already seen it, it doesn't work. So I tend to share fewer images, and perhaps ones I might put ones I know they like. I do tend to capture things. If I'm sending some photos, I might capture them in a more normal manner, which they might sort of sell it in a bit. But
yeah. I mean, do you, when you're really conscious of taking a photograph, let's say a landscape or something to do with Port Talbot, let's say, and you're trying very hard, but it never works out. It's like the portrait thing we've just been talking about, but it never quite works out. You kind of frame something, in your head, maybe this is a good photograph, but you're disappointed with the results afterwards.
Oh my God, yeah, all the time. I mean, there's one image in the book, and it's deliberately very, very flat. A lot of the book and the pacing is slow, and this idea of the sound of industry turning around and looking to the sky and seeing nothing, that idea of staring to the abyss, reflecting back at you. And yeah, so there's one image where it's just an overview of the town, the steelworks, the shopping centre. It's sort of bathed in a lovely evening light, and I must have gone up. It's quite a walk up that mountain to get that shot. Dinas is the name, Mount Dinas. And you go all the way up, and it's there, and it's lots of people have been from that point. So I sort of went slightly different, but I kept going to the top, and I kept taking images, and it wasn't quite right, even in similar light. So I must have gone 5 or 6 times, and it wasn't till I got that film back, and I was like, okay, this is the set, because I had this idea in my head, this perfect idea of what it might be, and it didn't work. But I know I wanted it in the narrative, and I know what it would look like. And every time you go, it guides your next visit, right? You go, okay, I'm not going to come in the morning because of the way the light's behind the mountain, or I'm not going to come at midday for obvious reasons, and I'm not going to come up in the rain. I thought it might be quite dramatic in the rain, but it didn't work. And I wanted that sort of still look to it. So there was, plenty. I think I rarely sort of walk around and take the image. I do walk around with big bags of cameras and spot everything, and then think this will look great. I'll come back.
Yeah.
It's normally in the evening light, to be honest, but I'll come back in the evening light, or when it's a bit less harsh or something like that.
So does your love affair with Port Talbot, where does that fit into the commercial work you do? Because you're a commercial working photographer living in London. You share a studio. Obviously, you have to make money. So how do you balance those two things? Because you could go off on a complete tangent and say, right, I'm just going to do Port Talbot forever. So where does the balance come for you, Roo?
I think it's the Port Talbot stuff. That's the reason I'm a photographer. You know,
Okay.
That's what I love, and that's my soul. And it's like any sort of personal project. It's a very long, draining, up and down, expensive process.
Yeah.
And that's what I like doing. And that's why I was saying to Brian earlier, I don't think commercial is a dirty word. I think we've all got jobs, and my commercial work is very different. I mean, you won't see most of my commercial work, to be honest. A lot of my commercial, the style of that's me in that book. That's You Eat That Book. That's me.
Yeah.
And that feeds into the style. And when you meet art buyers and commissioning people and creative directors, they're creative people. They work at an ad agency, sure, and that's their job, but they're also creative people, and they love, that's your bête noire, that's your opera, and they can sort of eat that and sort of understand it, and that's what he's good at. And it tends to be my commercial. It tends to be about sort of capturing either relationships or sort of the emotive element in something,
Right.
normally to sell a product, which is great. That works. So no, I don't see it as a dirty word. I'm a working photographer, as you say, and I enjoy that process. That with every project, it's not going to be exactly like, you don't have full control of every element, but you do have parameters, and it's a bit like shooting film. When I'm looking around, looking at different corners and lights, I'm shooting within the boundaries of what color negative can provide, and knowing I'm going to make a print for it, so that it's got to be exposed a certain way. And commercial work, you've got a budget, you've got a brief, you've got to capture this certain amount of blank space or negative space for text. And I actually find that quite fun. I used to have a job that wasn't fun. and shooting is, you've got to remember, it's stressful as it is on the day, that's the fun bit. And everyone's there, and if everyone's not having, what a great job being a photographer. I sort of have to pinch myself sometimes for as stressful as it is just taking photos.
Do you remember your first job
as a photographer? Yeah, I do actually. My first commercial job was with I remain nameless, but it was a fashion brand. And the girl I met randomly, I just sort of told her what I wanted to do, and I wasn't really doing it then. And sort of she gave me a shot. And I think we were doing sort of various eventy style stuff like that. But I realized, you could get paid for doing this. And it's not exactly what I want to do, but it's in that sphere. It's holding a camera and meeting people and taking photos. I don't think it was an event. It was like ambassadors of the brand, so portrait based. And then you were on the shoot. I remember actually an intern sort of talking to me about cameras, and it was quite stressful. And I was trying to shoot, and I didn't know who she was. She's an intern, and so I ended up just talking to her for ages, being patient as you should. I'm not saying I was just being really patient and talking to her, and then she messaged me years later, and she was working at another brand, and she became quite high up, and then she commissioned me for something else. And it was that sort of harsh sort of reminder, not that you shouldn't anyway, but you be nice to everyone. You should be nice to everyone, but you you don't know who that person is or what they want to do. And, I've gone up to photographers and things and talked to them, and responses have been mixed. But you remember the ones that were nice to you, and you never know who they're going to be sort of later down the line. I haven't thought about that for a while, actually. That was good. That was good. That was a good time. But at the time, it's a lot of money for taking photos, and then you look back now and you think, okay, they got a lot out of me for that. But what a great experience! Yeah. And
what have you learnt in your career as a photographer from, let's say, from a commercial point of view? I mean, obviously, getting on with people and being nice to people helps an awful lot. But what have you learnt as a photographer in that period?
I should clarify. I wasn't saying you should be nice for your career prospects, but it's a reminder that it's a small world you're in. So I think that's the thing I've learned, is it's a small world. And I think the main thing I've learned is when looking at other people's work, you don't know, you have to try and understand what they're doing.
Yeah.
And you might not like the image, and it doesn't matter if you like the image or not. When people talk about images, they say, don't like that. And they might be saying, I don't like the color red, but they're just saying they don't like the image. So it's trying to work out what's good about something. And commercial work's a good example, actually, because when you see something, you don't know what their parameters were. You don't know what budget it was. You don't know what they had to do, who's art directing. So you should never judge a photographer in that respect. But yeah, you do need a lot of patience, and I think you have to listen to what people mean and not what they say, because it's very, very, very different. Yeah, and that sort of patience, and you do have to work with everyone from every background. That's what's so great about it, and you're there for fun. I think that's the main thing. You're there to, if you're not creating real correct connections, then how do you capture and convey a real connection? So yeah, you're there to work, but I think lots of photographers talk about, was it Bailey or Leibovitz were talking about, it's not my job to make people feel at ease, which I really disagree with, actually. People get very nervous about how they look. You mentioned earlier the poet you were photographing. She's probably not used to being on camera, and she's a poet and probably didn't want to be photographed and nervous about it. And it's not a reflection of your photography. You never think like that.
Yeah. So what's on the cards next then, Roo? What's the next love affair?
Well, I decided, I think I told Brian last time we spoke, that I'm going to concentrate my work in South Wales.
Okay.
And other than loving it, I do like the character studies. I see it as the last bastion of places that I can visit, that I have a connection to. I grew up in Dorset, and it's all very different now. Where I grew up, it was a very agricultural village. It's very beautiful, very agricultural, but it's the thing I love about South Wales and Wales and the UK is the pub culture. And the pub culture has changed in Dorset. It's not farmers drinking bitter and snooker and darts and stuff. It's very different, and that's for good reason. Pubs need to make their business and make money, and it's all a bit gastro now, quite sort of London centric, I feel, in where I'm from. Whereas Port Talbot are proper pubs with people in there, and you can go up and talk to them, and none of these people have any sort of social media or any interest in that, but you can make best friends with people over a pint. So I am going to continue exploring that. I like that sort of, I used to fancy myself as a bit of a journalist, but I think I'd probably make up a bit too much to be a journalist to fit my narrative, which is not a problem when you're a photographer. You can shoot according to your narrative, But yeah, the idea of truth is less important for me in photography, whereas journalism, I think you've got a responsibility to the truth, right? And, so yeah, I've started a project now.
Cool.
And I really like how that's shaping up, and the intention, as always, is it's going to be a book, which I think is the purest form of photography. You've got full control, and You're not subject to any other external pressures. You'd hope.
I think there was a project that kind of was especially when I lived down that way, was that there are lots of dead ends in South Wales. You can reach a dead end. There's nowhere else to go. When you go up some of these valleys, there's nowhere else. It's just a mountain. And those sort of places kind of intrigue me as being dead ends, but not in a negative way. There was just nowhere else to go. They lived within that area, and there are some really quite poor places in the valleys. Gilfach,
Oh my word! Yeah,
Gilfach Goch is one place near Llantrisant, which is and very territorial as well. People in Gilfach Goch hated people who lived in Llantrisant, and the way it would manifest itself would be in a game of rugby, really, between the two villages. And
is it friendly rivalry though? Is it
oh no, it can be quite aggressive,
Oh, really? Okay.
There's a place which is literally 3 miles from Llantrisant called Beddau, and boys from Llantrisant wouldn't really go to Beddau to drink because it would end up as being not a cool place to be. So there's that sort of parochial sort of feel to some of the villages in the area. But I think the loss, when they lost the coal mines, something was extracted from society because what bonded them together was no longer there. Really. You still have that bond in Port Talbot because of the steelworks and because of the number of people who work in the steelworks and are attached to the steelworks in some sort of way, whether it's the local cafe or the shops. It's a really weird one. Did you find, because I live in a very rural area, so rural people are quite cautious about people, especially about photographers, they're quite cautious. Did you find the openness was there from the very start when you were doing the Port Talbot job?
Oh no, quite the opposite. I mean, there is that. So when you first approach people in Wales, there is a bit of that. Not giving you much, and it's not rude. I mean, I think in England it might be considered rude, but it's not. It's just that everyone's very upfront, I find, so you know where you are, right? And I quite like that. I quite enjoy that. It's quite refreshing, sort of knowing where you are, as you definitely don't know where you are in Middle England, what people actually think. But my granddad bought me a lot of real estate. My surname's Lewis. And I think people sort of get to the bottom of what your intentions are quite quickly. People do, in photography, there is a thing about photographing communities. And I think if your motivation is to get press or just get a photo, which is take a photo, so to speak, rather than sort of make a portrait, people sort of work that out quite quickly. If you're interested in the community and willing to learn about it and listen, then I think people see that quite quickly. And it's your, of course, it's on you to sort of prove that, I think, as well.
Well, what about people's reaction to people from London? Because I presume you would have shown people your work on Port Talbot and people have seen the work. What is their response to your photography of Port Talbot?
Do you know what? The response has been universally good. I think that sort of aesthetic is quite a nice, friendly aesthetic, isn't it? My photography, it's as you say, it's sort of often bathed warmth, and but it's also character studies. They're quite interesting people. That I shot so many people and so many photos, and it got to a point where that's when I knew I was finished, as I was getting rid of what I thought were really good photos, but the publisher was saying, and he was right, they didn't work for the project. So yeah, the reaction's been good. I haven't met anyone that doesn't sort of get it, actually, which is
cool.
I consider that a success. That's the sort of thing you're afraid of, is people won't understand what you're trying to do or what you want to convey. But I think there is a universal appeal in sort of classic I guess it's quite classic style photography, isn't it? And film aesthetically is very sort of aesthetically pleasing, isn't it? But yeah, the reaction's been universally positive. It's got that sort of the right elements of slightly zany, sort of wacky, sort of UFO stuff, but also these character studies that we can all get. We can all understand and look at because we're all people. And everyone loves their hometown. Everyone loves where they come from, whether outsiders like it or not. It's not my hometown, but it's shot with love.
You have Welsh blood, and you have that. There's that lovely Welsh word hiraeth, which is untranslatable really, but it means longing, a longing for. Do you feel that when you're in? Is that at the core of your thinking about wanting to do more work in South Wales?
I think so. Yeah, I haven't worked it out yet. There's just this draw there for me.
Yes.
And I think, and like you were saying in offline, there is something about the Welsh valleys, isn't there? Why is everyone? Are there 22? I read that 22, something like that. And why does so many amazing photographers drawn to it? And I think that's part of the magic. I think that's the romance, the rhythm. That there's something in it that photographers are drawn to, and all that mixed with the light. Wales is a very proud nation. I think it is. And I had so many great experience with people that were proud and of their town and Wales. And I really enjoyed that positivity. Port Talbot is easy to knock, and you should look at something for what it is, and judge it on what it is and not what it isn't.
Absolutely.
So people you meet, and there's a wonderful rhythm to the Welsh accent, and there's a wonderful history of literature and poetry and art.
Yeah.
So it is this place to explore. So I sort of see it, and of course photography as well. Herne, and which I know you've spoken to, and Newport, University of South Wales.
Yeah,
So many wonderful photographers.
It's really interesting. We went to North Wales with him, Brian and I, because he was doing stuff or photographing the biggest hill, the oldest rocks, etc., etc. So the furthest point east and the furthest point west in Wales, and it was really interesting because he wanted to see this really old bridge which is in the middle of nowhere. It's an old drover's bridge. And we went, and I was shooting as well. And I said to David, "Oh, this is an interesting angle." And he looked at the picture on the back of my camera, and he said, "No." I went, but he was right, actually. So he's a fascinating photographer, and his love for Wales is just extraordinary, really. London, very competitive place, but a lot of photographers. I'm friends with lots of photographers, I'm guessing. How many of them need their own photographic projects outside sort of commercial stuff or the news stuff that they do?
For me, it is the most important thing is personal work. And that's how I understand photography, is to do that. But photography is, different for different people. You get lots of different types of photographers, don't you? Certainly commercially, who might not value that. The photographers I know and hang out with and have really good relationships do personal work and do books. There's a very enthusiastic audience for photo books. I'm not sure how large it is, but it's very enthusiastic, and it's quite sort of, it's gaining popularity, I think, photo books. And that's probably access to cheaper printing, certainly cheaper processes, digital, that sort of thing, and publishers not being the gatekeepers anymore. You can self-publish. But I do really enjoy the process of monographs, and I think it's quite trendy to say you've done a monograph now, but it might not be a monograph. I don't really know. My best friend's a wonderful photographer. His name is Tom Johnson. He owns the studio, and he's got hundreds, probably nearly 1,000 photo books, and they're all out, and they're all really, some are really rare, but they're all been fingered through and used. And he makes a point of that. And nothing's perfect, nothing's kept in the wrapper. It's all, he's got some really incredibly rare books, and he's using them all the time as inspiration. These are images you can't find online. You know, it's like buried in a book somewhere. And you know, he'll look at it and take a photo of it, or scan it or something like that, and put it in a mood board. And that's been really good for me, having access to that amount of books. I've got a lot of photo books myself, but I think personal work's the most important, because, you know, if I'm shooting something about whatever the commercial work is, I don't want to say whatever it is, it's got nothing to do with shooting on film, it's got nothing to do with character studies, certainly nothing to do with Port Talbot or Wales. But what got me that job was that. And, you know, like we were talking about earlier, the people commissioning you are creative people, and they do love projects that we've all got in the industry for a reason.
Yes.
And generally it's creative people, and it's again, it's easy to knock someone who's might be working at a commercial ad agency, but that you don't know anything about them. You know, they might be extremely creative, and that's their job, and they want to reach out to other people that are creative, and so I've met wonderful creative people in that respect. But it's all come off personal work. I've done quite a few personal projects, and that tends to be what catches the attention.
So what photographers, I mean, talking about photo books, I mean, we have every photographer's got a collection, I guess. Where does your inspiration come from?
I think it's mainly from my circle, because we all sort of we all shoot film, and we all shoot different things. We're not in competition, and you share knowledge, and I think you try to get better. Like, oh, that looks great, how do you do that? And they tell you, and you know, you tell them, and you work on your process together and what works. And quite often what works commercially is the best way to do it. You know, the way to review and do color and retouch is the most efficient way, because it, you know, and the way to view and share, and you know, that sort of thing. And so yeah, a lot of my influences aren't necessarily photographers. You know, John Ronson was a big one, and
yes,
I do love Louis Theroux, but it's also photo books which don't, as I mentioned earlier, I don't know if I explained it properly earlier, they don't necessarily, I don't necessarily love the photographs or the style, but I love the project.
Okay.
And a really good example of that is Alice Tomlinson, who had a book on GOST called Ex-Photo. And I love her photographs, but the project was black and white, and it was so perfectly executed as a monograph, this study of pilgrimage and portraits, and she kept going back, and they're beautifully shot. And it wouldn't be I'm a color guy, you know, as you know, but it wouldn't normally be I wouldn't hold up one of those photos and go, that's an inspiration to me, but the book is an inspiration to me, and how it all comes together in the design, and the, you know, the look and feel of it, and how it all works, and how you eat it, and it's a perfect project. And another influence of that would be Stephen Gill.
Right.
I don't know if it's Stephen Gill, and he is, I see him as about as photography as you can get. Interestingly, he used to do some work with John Ronson, but he did this book called The Pillar, which is awesome. But the one that sort of really sticks in mind is called Field Studies, and it's a wonderful collection of, you know, the study of people and place, environment, and you just keep looking at the pages and keep coming back to it, and that's a big influence for me, and that I would consider a perfect photo book. Not that there is such a thing, but probably that was Sleeping by the Mississippi, and I think that's a perfect photo book.
I'm intrigued, but there's one photograph of the male voice choir that you have in the book. Did they sing for you?
They did. So that's the Cymric choir.
Yes.
They're the longest running, that's still going choir in Wales, I believe. They've got beautiful green jackets, and I couldn't get in touch with them. It was very hard to get in touch with them. None of their contacts were. They got no interest in sort of lanky photographers in London. So I actually went down to where they rehearsed. There was a place called Wesley Chapel, which is in Talbot.
Oh yes, Talbot, yeah.
And it's I think it's built 1871, and it used to be packed to the rafters with steelworkers, and now it's empty, of course, and that's a reflection of fewer people being employed by the plant, but also loss of faith, I suppose.
The loss of Welsh chapels is just in their closing, and the chapels that remain open maybe have 10, 12 people who go to them now.
That's right.
It's been a huge demise, really.
And they're beautiful, and this is kept beautifully preserved.
Yes.
Got the organ in it, and they rehearse there. I found out they rehearse, and I remember sort of parking up the car and walking down the hill towards the chapel, and I could hear the sound of the steelworks in the background. It's like a train, a locomotive going round, and it's the first thing that struck me in Port Talbot, actually, was this sound, which of course you don't notice after a few days, and it actually becomes quite soothing. And I find the sound quite soothing. It did remind me of visiting my granddad and the boatyard with the masts clinking together, very sort of like rain on a window. And as I got closer to the chapel, I could hear them rehearsing and getting louder and louder. I can't remember what they were singing, but I went in and there was all these men, these men in their 60s, probably about 30 or 40 of them in a circle, singing to one another. It's a very sort of moving image, and I was like, wow, I've got to capture this. And so I talked to them about it, and we went through, said what I wanted to do, and I said I wanted to shoot them a 16mm of them with a sound recorder, like Nick Broomfield's another influence. I don't know if you know the documentarian Nick Broomfield. He would go into with his sound recording and interview people. So we got a boom operator to record it. I wanted it almost like documentary style, and they agreed to it. They agreed to do it, and they agreed to learn this hymn, which was sung after the Ffoton disaster, that horrible disaster where the village came out on the valley and sung. And we did a snippet of that, and it was overlooking the steelworks, and it was very poignant because, in England we don't do that so much, the male voice choirs, and these are all working class boys. They've been in the steelworks, they're tough guys, and they've retired. And one of the gentlemen there, his job was just to make sure everyone's tie was straight and looking good, and I really enjoyed that. Very sort of moving, and funny enough, as you mentioned earlier, the image in the book is actually an in-between moment. I think it's just after we finished. I was just shooting I had my EMYR set up. I was just shooting that, and just capture this. They're talking to each other, and it was the sun came out, everything was perfect. But that was a real sort of moving. This idea of the community together, like you mentioned with the rugby clubs. And the other experience I had like that was Talbot Rugby Football Club, who the BBC did a documentary of, narrated by Michael Sheen, called Balls of Steel. And there's this rugby club with the men of men. They do this panto every year, and they start in September and take it very seriously. And I was lucky enough to sort of see that, go backstage, and they let me in, and they all talk so fondly about it. And what struck me is when they were talking about it and how much they enjoyed it and the community and the spirit, they were basically talking about how much they loved each other and loved the town and loved their, without saying those words. And I just thought it was so wonderful. Lots of the jokes in the pantomime I didn't get, very sort of in jokes, but it was very funny. And, of course, every night got a bit longer. And 3-4 months to rehearse this pantomime, which they've written based on a famous one. The Beauty and the Abyss was the pantomime I was lucky enough to be at. And behind the scenes, in the green room, they were playing games and winding each other up, and it was a lovely experience. The whole town comes out, sells out every night, raises an awful lot of money for charity in the club. And of course, when they get there, they might be coming straight from work and put the high vis on, and then put their wig and pantomime clobber on and go straight out. So that was a wonderful, that sort of camaraderie you mentioned. That was a wonderful experience. And there are a few key shots like that which were very important to get. And it just worked. Like there's one of Mike Locke or Pancho from Dirty Sanchez, and we got this boat and this rowing boat. I wanted to try and capture this beautiful scene to shoot. So we rented this boat, and I got it in 16mm again, and we got him to read this poem called "Clown in the Moon" by Dylan Thomas. It's my favourite poem, always has been. And and for me, the poem talks about this beauty and the sadness. Being sad is okay. It's a very powerful emotion and an important one. And I always think about it with dreams. What's the most poignant dream you've ever had, and was it just happy? And the answer to that to me is no. I mean, quite often they might be a bit sad or make you a bit angry, or and happy. Whatever it is. And Port Talbot is this dreamland. It's this wild place. And the poem talks about, for me, being in between the real and the dreamland, this tremulously sort of unknown area, and about this clown on the moon looking in at everyone else. So this feeling of isolation. And a rainbow came out, and as we were filming it, a rainbow came out under Pancho, and he perfectly embodies the Welsh spirit. He is a gentleman, a wonderful, lovely voice, as you'll hear. I'll send you the video, which was shot for the exhibition. They were just to display exhibitions. And he embodies the spirit, and there's this rainbow behind him. It's like he doesn't even know, with the steelworks in the background, the rainbow, reading Dylan Thomas. And Dylan Thomas, of course, born Swansea way, only 6 miles from Port Talbot. It's a very beautiful area.
Yeah, it is.
That whole area, Kenfig, Porthcawl, and then Aberavon Beach, longest beach in Wales, I believe.
Yeah.
And then the Mumbles, Swansea, and that's what I don't dislike when people slag off the steelworks, really, because 1 mile that way, it's set amongst waterfalls and beautiful reservoirs and mountains and sand dunes. In summer, you had this blue plankton in July visits, which I've never seen anywhere. I've never heard of blue plankton visiting in the UK, other than it's always Southeast Asia or something. And I mean, I've been to Southeast Asia, but this blue plankton visits and the flaring of the steelworks, I'm sure you're very familiar with, but this is what made me think of this wild place: is the sky lights up on fire. That it's this process, and they do it at night because of the pollution. But when the sky lights up, your whole room lights up, the whole town lights up, and this fine dust comes out called fallout. And if the wind's blowing the wrong way, it will go over the town and cover everyone's cars. And but you can go from a mountain, and within a short walk, you go from this mountain over these sand dunes onto this beautiful beach. You're looking towards Mumbles, you're looking towards Kenfig, and people want to talk about the steelworks. And I don't know, I just think it's this mad place. It's totally mad, and everyone walks around like it's totally normal, and it's not. And it's not. It's wonderful, but it's not normal.
I think one of just to sort of kind of draw things to a close, but I think the one thing that's a privilege being a photographer is that you get to be with people you love and admire, and I think that's kind of you can't measure that. And obviously, with your love for Port Talbot and stuff, you can't measure what you feel about the place. And that's, and it goes back to what I was saying right at the very beginning about that warmth you have in your pictures. That's it, in essence, for me. People you love and admire. And crack on, really, and do your best with it,
Thank you. I'm so pleased that's come through. As I say, I was worried, but it's it's a sensitive study.
Yes.
And that's what it's always intended as. So I'm pleased it's pleased it's come across.